The summer sun was beginning to set over the bustling city plaza, painting the cobblestones in a warm amber glow. Musicians tuned their instruments. Children ran between benches, and tourists clustered with cameras ready. In the center of the open space, a small wooden stage had been set up for the evening's cultural performances. Among the lineup was Elena Varga, a 24-year-old dancer whose elegance on stage was the envy of her peers. She wore a flowing crimson dress that swirled like liquid fire with each movement. Her hair, pinned in a neat bun, shimmered under the golden light. She had trained all week for this public rehearsal, an opportunity to showcase her routine before tomorrow's festival. The crowd's murmur softened as the music began, her bare feet tracing intricate patterns across the platform. But not everyone in the audience came for the art. Near the front stood a cluster of young men in ripped jeans and loud sneakers, their voices carrying over the music. They weren't here to watch. They were here to provoke. One of them, tall and broad-shouldered, with a smirk plastered across his face, leaned toward his friend and muttered something crude. The others laughed. At first, Elena ignored them. She had dealt with hecklers before jealous performers drunk passers-by, but she never broke focus. Yet their taunts grew louder, deliberately, timed to overlap the softest parts of her music. Then it happened. As she executed a graceful spin near the stage's edge, the tall one stepped forward. In a swift, brazen move, he reached up and tugged at her dress. The fabric snagged in his grip, tearing along the side seam with an ugly rip that echoed in her mind far louder than the actual sound. Gasps rippled through the audience. Some onlookers stifled laughter. Others instinctively raised their phones recording. Elena froze for half a heartbeat, her breath catching in her throat. Heat flushed her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from the white-hot anger that surged up her spine. She met the bully's eyes, and in that moment, the smirk faltered just slightly, as if he'd seen something dangerous flicker there. The music wavered in the background. She adjusted her torn dress with measured calm, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her flustered. Inside, however, her mind was already whirring, not with panic, but with precision. She recognized his type instantly, the kind who thrived on making others small in order to feel big, the kind who believed dancers were delicate ornamental things that could be toyed with. But Elena was not delicate. The crowd expected her to break, to flee, or at least to cry. Instead, she held her posture, forcing her voice to remain steady as she announced she would take a short break before resuming. The applause was polite, scattered, most people unsure whether to cheer or murmur about what they had just witnessed. As she stepped off stage, her fingers brushed the fabric of her dress. The tear was long and ugly, a scar on what was meant to be a flawless moment. But scars, she reminded herself, could also tell powerful stories. Her jaw tightened. She would not just repair this dress. She would repair the balance of respect in this plaza. And when she did, the same phones that captured her humiliation would capture something else entirely, something unforgettable. Elena sat alone in the dim backstage tent, her crimson dress draped over her knees, the ugly tear still mocking her like an open wound. Outside, the plaza had returned to its usual rhythm, street vendors shouting prices, children's laughter mingling with the strum of a guitar. But her mind was far from calm. Her hands clenched the fabric so tightly that her knuckles whitened. Every fiber of her being screamed for her to march back out there and confront them. Yet she didn't move, not yet. She knew better than to strike in anger. Timing was everything. A familiar scent of herbal ointment drifted up from her bag. She unzipped it slowly, revealing a roll of black silk sashes and a pair of flat-soled dance shoes with scuffed leather edges. They didn't look like much, but they were relics from a past most here would never suspect. 3 years earlier, Elena had been a national wushu champion, trained in the art of explosive spins, blinding kicks, and pinpoint strikes. She had earned gold medals, traveled internationally, and stood on podiums with a flag draped over her shoulders. Then came the knee injury. A mistimed landing during a jump spin had torn her ligament, ending her competitive career in an instant. Dance had been her refuge. It allowed her to stay in motion without the brutal impact of combat. Most people only saw grace in her movements. They didn't realize every pirouette hid the mechanics of a spinning back kick. Every flowing turn masked the coil of a martial stance. She had vowed never to fight again, not because she couldn't, but because she didn't want her life defined by confrontation. But tonight, something had shifted. The bully's mocking face flashed in her mind, followed by the sound of the fabric ripping and the scattered chuckles from the crowd. That sound replayed like a taunt she couldn't mute. Her stomach tightened. From outside, voices drifted in deep, careless laughter. She could hear them again. The same group. She caught snippets. Did you see her face? She looked like she'd cry any second. Bet she won't even show up tomorrow. Elena's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. Tomorrow? Yes, tomorrow would be perfect. She reached into her bag again, pulling out a small notebook. On its worn pages were rough sketches of her routines, arcs of motion, marked beats of the music reminders in the margins about when to breathe or extend. Her pen hovered for a moment before she began making adjustments. She wasn't just going to dance tomorrow. She was going to perform a weaponized choreography. She visualized it. The music swells. She spins. They step closer. She pivots into a graceful arabesque, except the leg doesn't just extend it, snaps like a whip striking mid-thigh. She lowers into a deep turn, except the heel brushes their ribs before anyone realizes what's happening. To the untrained eye, it would look like an accidental collision. To her, it would be justice. As the sun dipped lower and the plaza lights flickered on, she packed her things and left without looking back. She didn't need to confront them tonight. The anticipation would build in her silence. By the time she stepped onto that stage tomorrow, they would think she had swallowed her pride and returned meekly. And that was when she'd shatter their illusion, spin by spin. The next evening, the plaza was even more crowded. Word of last night's rehearsal and its humiliating interruption had spread faster than the summer heat. The performance was no longer just part of the festival's lead-up. It was a spectacle people came specifically to see. Elena arrived early, wearing a new dress, deep sapphire, this time cut for both elegance and freedom of movement. The fabric clung just enough to accentuate her lines, but allowed her legs to move without restriction. Her hair was tied high, a few loose strands framing her face. In the crowd, she spotted them almost immediately, the same pack of bullies lounging near the stage's edge, their expressions dripping with smug anticipation. She forced herself not to look at them for long. Instead, she focused on her warm-ups, subtle stretches that doubled as martial prep. A slow shoulder roll disguised the loosening of her scapular joints. A graceful bend masked a low stance test for balance. The music crew gave her a nod from the side, and she knew the moment was approaching. The bullies were restless. One of them, the tall one from before, leaned to his friend and muttered something crude while glancing at her legs. The others laughed, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. A few people in the audience shifted uncomfortably. The first notes of her music began low, resonant, pulling everyone's attention toward the stage. She stepped forward, every movement, liquid, her arms slicing through the air like ribbons caught in a gentle breeze. The crowd settled into silence, but Elena wasn't just dancing. She was watching. Every step brought her closer to the edge of the stage where they waited. Her turns slowed just enough to gauge distance, her eyes scanning the positions of their feet the space between them, the likely angle of their reach. 2 minutes in, she gave them their chance. A sweeping turn took her to the left side of the stage, dangerously close to their reach. As if on cue, one of them stepped forward. His hand shot out, fingers grazing the fabric of her dress. He thought he was fast. He wasn't. Elena pivoted sharply, the motion seamlessly integrated into the choreography. The spin carried her full weight and momentum into a leg sweep that tapped his shin, not hard enough to injure, but enough to make him stumble backward into his friends. The crowd thought it was part of the act. They laughed and clapped, but the bullies weren't laughing now. Her movements drew them in like moths to a flame. Each time she neared the edge, another hand reached another accidental collision, happened her elbow brushing a rib, her shoulder spinning into a chest, her heel skimming a thigh. Each one faster, sharper, harder to dismiss as coincidence. The audience's attention was now divided, half watching the beauty of her dance, half sensing the tension building at the stage's edge. Phones were out. Some whispered, recognizing the same group from last night. Then came the moment she'd been engineering all along. She drifted toward the tall one again, letting him think she was unaware. He leaned in, smirking, his hand poised to grab. Her next spin came faster than the music seemed to allow, a blur of sapphire fabric and flying hair. This time, her heel caught his hip with enough force to send him staggering sideways. The impact looked like part of the choreography to the untrained eye, but his grimace told the truth. She didn't break form, didn't pause. She simply kept dancing, letting the tension coil tighter, knowing the real blow was yet to come. The music shifted slower at first, then swelling with layered percussion, like the buildup before a storm. Elena's heartbeat matched the rhythm, every beat syncing with the precision of her plan. The crowd leaned forward unconsciously, sensing something about to happen. The bullies, now visibly irritated, exchanged glances. The tall one, his pride wounded by the earlier stumble, nodded toward her with a challenge in his eyes. She caught it instantly. Good. Let him step in. Let him believe he was still in control. She floated across the stage, movements, fluid hands slicing the air in arcs that caught the light. Every turn of her body was deliberate, her center anchored, but ready to explode outward. The bullies shifted closer to the platform, their shadows stretching over the edge. Then came the perfect cue. A sharp cymbal crash rang out from the speakers, and Elena leapt into a high turn, her skirt flaring like a blooming flower. As she came down, she spun again, faster this time, a controlled blur of motion. The tall bully lunged forward, fingers curling toward her side. Her body dropped into a low, sweeping turn, the hem of her skirt grazing the stage floor. Her leading leg extended outward in what looked like a graceful flourish, but the pointed toe struck his ankle like a hammer. He yelped, stumbling forward onto the stage itself, nearly falling to his knees. The crowd gasped and then erupted in laughter, unsure if it was part of the show or a slip-up. Before he could recover, she pivoted on her planted foot, her body lifting into a whip-fast spin. Her other leg shot up, not high enough to look aggressive, but perfectly angled, so the side of her calf slammed into his hip with a force masked by the music's crescendo. He staggered back into his friends, who instinctively stepped forward to catch him. Big mistake. Her next rotation carried through like an unbroken wave, the momentum transferring from one kick to another. A lower spin swept the legs of the second man, who tumbled sideways into the third. They crashed together in an ungainly heap, arms flailing, faces flushed with shock. The audience roared, not in outrage, but in delight. To them, this was high art, an electrifying blend of dance and stunt work. Phones were raised, the flashes of recording lights sparking across the plaza like fireflies. One of the bullies tried to scramble up, But Elena's final turn was already in motion. She leapt into the air, skirt spiraling around her like a sapphire cyclone, and landed with the precision of a blade finding its sheath. The heel of her foot tapped his shoulder, just enough to send him spinning back off the stage. She ended the sequence with a dramatic stillness, one arm extended upward, head tilted slightly toward the sky, breathing perfectly in rhythm with the music's last note. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then, as if a dam had broken, the crowd erupted into thunderous applause and cheers. The bullies sat on the ground, winded and wide-eyed, trying to piece together how they'd just been dismantled in front of hundreds of witnesses without a single overt act of aggression. They looked less like predators now, and more like schoolboys who'd been caught misbehaving. Elena's gaze swept over them only once, cool and unshaken, before she turned and walked toward the back of the stage. Every step was deliberate, her chin high, the unspoken message clear. Never mistake grace for weakness. The plaza was still buzzing when Elena stepped off stage, the cheers echoing in her ears like the roll of distant thunder. People crowded near the steps, some calling her name, others eager to shake her hand or tell her how brilliant and creative her performance had been. She smiled politely, accepting the praise, but her eyes scanned the crowd for the ones who mattered most. There they were, her would-be tormentors, no longer loud or cocky. The tall one's smirk had evaporated completely, replaced with a tight-lipped scowl. His friends avoided her gaze altogether, their shoulders hunched as if hoping to fold into themselves and disappear. Elena didn't approach them. She didn't need to. The humiliation had been delivered cleanly, wrapped in applause and immortalized by every camera in the audience. By the time the first video hit social media, their reputations would unravel without her lifting another finger. She lingered just long enough for their eyes to meet across the plaza. A silent exchange passed between her and the tall one, his filled with resentment and confusion, hers calm and unshaken. He looked away first. One of the festival organizers rushed over beaming. That finale was incredible. I've never seen a dance blend so perfectly with, well, whatever that was, he said, gesturing vaguely toward the scene of the toppled bullies. Elena's lips curved faintly. It's just movement, she replied. But sometimes movement has consequences. By now, the bullies were retreating toward the far end of the square, muttering to each other in woo, urgent tones. A few bystanders recognized them and whispered, pointing. Their swagger had evaporated. Every step looked heavier. Elena turned her attention back to the stage where another performer was setting up. She didn't want to overshadow the festival with lingering tension. Her job was done. The lesson had been given. Still, as she moved through the crowd toward the exit, snippets of conversation trailed behind her. That spin. Did you see their faces? She never even touched them hard. No, she did. You just didn't notice. At the plaza's edge, the evening breeze caught her hair, carrying with it the smell of roasted chestnuts and fresh rain. She paused for a moment, feeling the hum of energy still thrumming in her chest. Not adrenaline exactly, but the satisfaction of having reclaimed her dignity on her own terms. She didn't fight because she wanted revenge in the way they'd understand it. She fought because there are moments in life when silence becomes permission, and she refused to let that moment define her. As she walked down the narrow street away from the square, the music from the festival faded behind her. But the image of those bullies sitting on the ground wide-eyed under the glare of hundreds of witnesses remained sharp in her mind. Tomorrow, she would return to her normal life, to her rehearsals and quiet studio. But tonight, she knew the story of the dancer who spun bullies off their feet would travel farther than she ever could, and she was perfectly fine with that. Life will hand you moments when others try to diminish your worth, sometimes in public, sometimes with an audience eager to see you falter. In those moments, you can choose to crumble under their weight or to stand taller, even if standing means finding an unconventional way to fight back. Elena's story isn't about violence. It's about reclaiming control. She didn't let humiliation fester into bitterness, nor did she let her past skills remain buried out of fear of judgment. Instead, she transformed the stage, once a place of vulnerability, into a platform for power, weaving strength into the fabric of her art. The lesson is simple. Grace and resilience are not opposites. They can coexist, and when they do, they can turn the tables on those who underestimate you. Never let someone else decide the limits of your dignity, because sometimes the quietest revenge is the one everyone remembers.